All right, 5 o'clock, we'll call the Administration Committee meeting for December 19th, 2023 to order. Roll call, please.
Chair Cook,
Present?
Vice Chair Counter,
Present.
Supervisor Long,
Present.
Supervisor Fiedler,
Present.
and Supervisor Burning is excused. We have a quorum.
Perfect, thank you. Next item, approval of the minutes from Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. Any changes to the minutes? No? All right, the minutes will stand as presented. Now we're up to public comment. Any public comment? Looks pretty quiet. Any public comment? Any public comment? All right, no public comment. We'll move on to business items. Our first item, financial reports for November 2023. Ken?
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple of things that I did want to point out, starting on page 23 of the packet.
The big red numbers?
Yeah, those. I thought maybe I should explain myself. So self-insurance, that's our health insurance, health and dental insurance run through self-insurance. So if you notice at the bottom of that page, this is a little sensitive. County treasurer, we'll just skip over that one. All right, so the self-insurance. So if you notice the negative $1.15 million, that number is going to continue to grow probably because not all of December expenses are in. There'll probably be another $1 million of expenses coming in. We will have another $400,000 of the revenue side coming in, and we'll also have, I think, about $400,000, Leaf was saying, of reinsurance coming back in. So there are some revenues coming back in, but there are some more expenses too. And that's just the nature of self-insured health insurance plans. You have good years and you have bad years. So for example, if we look at premium cost in 2021, it was $11.3 million. And then in 2022, it was $10.1 million, dropped by $1.2 million. Well, this year we're already up to $11.6 million with probably another $1 million coming in. So it goes up, it goes down. That's why we maintain a fund balance there to absorb those ups and the downs. But this year it did spend more money. So what that tells us though is next year you're probably looking at larger premium increases because it's going to be based upon experience ratings. So that's one of the insurance funds. They're all negative, so we'll go through all of those. Health savings, that one's fine this year. So the property and liability insurance, we get to the bottom line of that. So that's any building damage, auto damage, other types of things. Hail damage was the big thing this year. We were hit by a big hailstorm, a lot of repairs on that. So that one turned negative. The other thing is the premiums are just continuing to go up. We've been trying to keep our rate increase smaller, but the premiums have been double digits. And like auto insurance next year, we were seeing a 27% increase in our auto insurance because 3 out of the last 4 years we've had hail damage in excess of $100,000 worth of hail damage. So it's reflected in the bottom line there. And again, that fund balance is a very healthy fund balance. We'll be able to absorb that little amount of loss that we were going to have this year, but you have good years and you have bad years. The last one then is workers' compensation. You can see we're negative by $35,000. So workers' compensation includes death benefits. And so we had a large death benefit payout. Minus that one claim, the fund would probably be fine. But unfortunately, there was that claim this year, which explains that one. Other than that, I was just going to touch on the last couple of sheets in the packets. So our vehicle registration fee, you won't see the increase on here for months and months. It'll be 5-6 months before we see those new numbers starting to come in because there's a delay on the collection and a delay on the reporting for it. And then sales tax remains strong. We're about $495,000 ahead of where we were last year at this time. which is great, other than you guys raised it by 1.1 million, not 500,000. So. When we look at our KIP, so this is all the projects, we monitor them. The fund balance projected at the end of the year is $9 million in the KIP. We have about $3 million that we're going to spend next year, I think 3.6 million, that we're going to spend out of that fund balance. But still enough money to carry us for the next couple of years. That's where a lot of our extra ARPA dollars went. So that'll stay healthy. And then the last one is the ARPA projects. So we're monitoring those and keeping track of those. And this is not yet adjusted for some of the new projects that we have on there. But any other questions on the financial report?
Supervisor Long?
So if we're having bad years in a couple different areas, will that, how much of an impact will that have, do you think, on overall 2023 results?
Probably none at all, because all of those are in segregated funds. And so none of them are hitting the general fund. They're all hitting the different separated insurance funds. So we have fund balance policies that cover all the funds, and they all maintain their own balances to absorb the ups and the down years. But we do monitor their balances so they don't get too high, and we monitor their balances so they don't get too low. So this is a down year for 3 of those insurance funds, but we'll be fine. The balances will be able to absorb them.
Supervisor Cowner?
Yes, similar question to that with the experience and the, are we going to see an increase in the experience and the mod rate for workman's comp with that type of situation, or will that kind of balance out? I know typically if you have a strong claim, then they make adjustments to your overall mod rate.
We're self-insured for workers'
Okay.
comp, so
You don't have to worry
we
about
won't
that.
we won't charge ourselves an increase.
All right. Just got to understand that part.
Yeah.
I'm used to doing it the other way.
Yep.
All right, and then
Yeah,
the last.
self-insured's actually pretty rare in the work comp. It actually works to our benefit though most years. So.
Makes
And,
sense.
and while I know all 3 of those insurance funds are having a down year, most years have been positive years when you look back over the last decade. So, we hit 60-70% positive rating. It works out to our benefit financially in the long run.
Okay. Then with that big hailstorm we had last summer that we all recall, did we have any, on this facility, did we end up with experiencing any roof damage to the rubber roof?
Oh, no roof damage. No, just vehicles. Yeah, we've checked the roof several times after these hailstorms, but bounces off rubber better than the hood of my car.
All right, any other questions from the committee? All right, with that we'll move on to our next business item, reclassification request for land use conservation technicians. Audrey?
This goes along with things you've seen us doing over the last couple of years where we're trying to create more flexibility and more chances for promotion within the departments.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Is there a motion? Oh, yeah, Supervisor Fiedler.
I don't have a question, but just an observation. And I talked to Supervisor Burney about this as well, and I'll very generally characterize him as being favorably inclined to what I'm going to say. And that is that many of the agenda items we have at this committee are fairly routine personnel issues. And of course, at the main board meetings, we have a consent calendar. And so what we talked about very generally was the possibility, and to see if it would be helpful to Ken, as he looked at various personnel questions. Some of them might be more timely needed to implement than others before we have a meeting. Some might be extremely routine, I think like the one we're considering now. And perhaps there's a mechanism whereby, without us not doing our job to conduct oversight, we might want to suggest guidance to the administrator. He might want to come back to us with certain types of administrative and personnel issues that we delegate to him to execute, and he can, like we do with a consent calendar, let us know what they are, leave us with final approval, but he can act directly, perhaps in conjunction with the chairman of the committee, to bring to us issues that are fairly straightforward. And then on issues that need debate, we would have more time to go over them rather than, even on this one, spend a couple, 2 or 3 minutes going over a pretty straightforward event. So I just wanted to observe that. I don't have a motion. I don't have any objection to what we're about to do, but perhaps that might be something that Ken or the others could consider for another meeting and come back and make a suggestion on that. That's all I have.
Thank you for your thoughts, Supervisor Fiedler. Do we have a motion for this item? Motion by Supervisor Counter.
Yep.
Second. Which Bob wants the second? All right. Second by Supervisor Long. Any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next item, reclassification request for positions in conjunction with new wage grid. Audrey.
Okay. So as part of the McGrath study that we did this year to update our wage grid, we also wanted to look at positions and ensure that every position is correctly defined by what their job duties are. And during that analysis, we noticed that financial associate 2, that we would like to pull out a new position and rate them as a payroll specialist instead, create a new job description for that position. So it's not asking for an additional FTE. That FTE already exists. It's just pulling that position out. It is different enough from a financial associate 2 position that it should really be classified as its own job. The other ones are that we'd like to pull out are ADRC specialists 1 and 2. We currently have some benefit specialists, dementia care, elder care, and benefit specialists, as well as some information and assistance specialists and options counselors that we'd like to reclassify as ADRC specialists instead. Once again, their job duties are different enough that they should be reclassified in their own role versus a social worker role.
All right, any questions? Supervisor Counter.
With the changes on that one, is there anything, as I see you're taking certain ones with, where they're specializing in certain types of care, are they then going to be required to have all of those requirements as part of their description then?
Right, like there's certain special, yep. So right now, the job description, because they're listed as social workers, even though they aren't really working as social workers, they're working as like INA specialists, which does require specific certifications for those roles. So it's not currently listed in the job description because it's kind of a blanket job description. So under this new role, it will be specifically listed what certifications are required for the position.
But they're not certified in all of them, they're certified in one of the specialties.
One of the specialties, yep. So
Right.
we have a job description for each one.
Yep.
I guess that was.
Yep.
Yeah, that was kind of the question, so I was just wondering, now you're combining them all, are they gonna have this whole gamut
Sure.
of specialties they gotta specialize in?
Oh,
One
gonna
of
be
the
harder.
specialties on the list.
One of them, which is
Yeah.
okay.
right, yep,
Because otherwise it'd be pretty hard to find somebody that's got that
Correct.
many.
yes.
Yeah, that was the question.
And I would just point out that these are it's attached to the wage grid, so I know that's the next agenda item. Any approval of this is contingent on the new wage grid being adopted, because that's where they're listed at. We just wanted to make sure that we weren't regrading positions or changing them without separating them from the overall grid, so you don't have to sort through everything on the grid and try to figure it out yourself. 'Cause Audrey's the only one that would know it.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Is there a motion? A motion by Supervisor Fiedler, oops, second by Supervisor Cowner. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. And as Ken suggested, next item is the updated wage grid, resolution adopting updated wage grid. Ken?
Yes. So the wage grid, we've been working on for quite some time. We started this probably in May of last year with Dr. McGrath. She did a lot of field work, getting comparables and generating a lot of data for us to take a look at. It came in too late in the budget cycle to build it into the budget. And so really we determined, let's just slow it down a little bit, make sure that we spend a lot of time with staff going over it, and make sure we bring a product that we can adopt, and we'll adopt it later into 2024. So what the wage grid is designed to do, and overall what it's doing, is it's making St. Croix County more competitive in the hiring. So if you look at any one position on the wage grid, what you're going to see is that the starting wage is higher and the top wage is higher. And so that's going to make us more competitive when we hire somebody, which is where we're struggling, is hiring and retaining employees. But this will help with the recruitment part of it. On the retention part, the wage grid does a couple of things. It's not meant to give the employees an increase, and I pointed out the statistics in there where of the 598 of the employees are receiving less than a step. It's just a replacement on the grid that's closest to their current wage that doesn't result in a decrease in pay. So no one takes a decrease in pay. There's 4 that statistically hit 0%. And then there's 49 of them, if I, my memory is, yeah, 49 of them that are higher. So now those 49, what's happening is their position was reclassified higher, and they were way at the bottom end. So if they are on the very first step, because they've only worked here for 9 months, and their position was moved higher, well, their starting step now is several dollars higher, and that's where those are falling in. So it's not the senior employees, it's actually junior employees that make up that 49. And of those, there was only 2 that are over 10%. There are 24 of them that are between 5 and 10%, and then there's 23 that are between 2.5% and 5%, so that's kind of the spread. Both the 2 are both in community development, both less than a year with the county. So overall, the wage grid adoption is not meant to address current employees' compensation or retention specifically in that way. It would cost us millions if we wanted to readjust everyone to their years of experience. So we can't afford to do that. So we'll place them, which is the same methodology we've used since 2016 when this was first implemented. But what it does do is there's a couple of enhancements that we made to the wage grid besides making it higher on both the starting and top end. So top end higher, so if you were at the top of the grid, you're not going to be at the top anymore because it went up by a couple of dollars. So you're going to have more steps to grow into. On the lower end of the grid, we expanded where the 2% compared to the 1.5% increases are in the end. So depending on where you are in the steps, you get 2.5%, 2 or 1%. So there's more steps at 2.5 now than were on the old grid, more steps at 2% and less steps they're at 1.5%. And the reason for that is when we rebuilt the grid, we rebuilt it to the same configuration as we had in 2016, but over the years we were cutting off the bottom steps, which were 2.5 steps. We couldn't add 2.5s on the end, so we were adding 1.5s on the end. So it recreates more potential for earnings for the lower end of the spectrum employees for steps, for future step increases. So those are the parts that will help with the retention, although it really is, I'll admit, it's really geared more towards recruitment by adopting this. The overall cost is about $285,000 to implement this on March 2nd or March 3rd. The reason we want to implement in March is because it's no easy task to change this number of employees in the system. We have to rebuild the grid into the computer, and then every employee has to be really hand verified that we got them on the right spot. So we need a little bit of time to make sure that we have that done and done correctly. So that's where the March implementation comes in. The cost of it, the 285, we had reserved $500,000 of fund balance. I'd kind of said, I knew this was coming, so I wanted to ask for some of that not to be reallocated. So we fell well below the target number, so we're well under that. So there won't be any cash flow issue. And really, when I looked at the individual department impact, it was 0.5%. So I'm actually not even asking for a budget amendment to amend everyone's budgets. I'm just going to tell the departments they have 0.5% that they'll need to make up somewhere during the year to account for their wage increase that's going to go into effect. So that's everything that I can think of. Questions on it?
Quick question.
Either, yep.
You mentioned a $285,000 cost, and we'd set aside 500, and that had been part of our discussions a number of months ago, and we'd also, I think at that time, in rough numbers, taken 500,000 allocated effectively for a tax decrease, effectively. With regard to the $215,000 that's left, do we have a usage for that you have in mind, or is it potentially possible to allocate that toward the tax decrease that we enacted as part of the budget for this year?
Yeah. Tax bills are out.
Right, no, well, not for this year, but for
Yeah.
next year.
Yeah, I mean, 200,000.
It doesn't make much difference, but
Yeah.
then if we added that to something we might do next year, in the summer as we consider the budget, is that a possibility, or do you have other, you might have other good ideas in mind?
Yeah, I was just going to leave it there because it'll become part of the number we consider next August. So about August every year is when we look at the fund balance. So that number will still be sitting there. We'll still be that much over our fund balance target. So the county board at that point in time will be able to make the decision of what they want to do and based upon what our current needs are by next August. So I didn't think it was a big enough dollar amount
you're right.
to address individually.
I agree.
Supervisor Long.
So I'm trying to get really comfortable with this, and I'm just not quite there yet. But are we truly struggling with attracting employees and retention? What's our turnover rate at this point? And maybe do you have some examples? Or I'm just looking for some really good, solid, objective, empirical evidence that can make us all more comfortable that we're going to spend an extra $284 on compensation next year, even though we already did give raises and a step increase for 2024.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of a wide question, but
No,
anything that
I
you
know
can do to.
a specific example to help illustrate it for you. A lot of times we're not hiring at the lowest step because the market conditions are dictating that we need to hire higher. So clerk of courts, they're basically their lowest step they'll hire at is 5. So they're not going any lower than that. So on the new wage grid, that's really step 1. So we'll be able to start hiring back at the beginning of the grid, which is the way the grid was designed. Because if you hire too high in to the grid, you max out within a few years, and then there's no incentive for you to stay here because you're not getting the increases other than a COLA. So then you're going to leave and go somewhere else. So that's not what the grid is designed to do. So it's not functioning properly with the current design from 2019, the last time we updated it. So this is a pretty big overhaul of the grid, but it will make us more competitive on the hiring side of things. We average about 10 to 15% annual turnover. So there is quite a bit of turnover, and I don't know how much that's going to decrease that amount. We have a huge amount of competition with the Twin Cities area, and everyone in the Twin Cities makes more than they make working here in St. Croix County. But generally, we're higher than we are in the more rural counties to the east or north or south of us. So we're right in the middle where we should be. But this grid enhancement readjusts us to where we need to be. I don't know if you had any more examples or other things that you wanted to add to that question.
No, I'd say that that's a pretty consistent across the board, not just with the clerk of court's office, but yeah, that we aren't getting a lot of applicants and we're getting a lot of positions that we get wage requests for, we approve, and then the applicants turn down the positions after we offer a wage to them. That happens several times a week, that we're losing applicants because we're not offering high enough wages. So, and I know that's frustrating when you don't have a high applicant pool to interview from in the beginning anyway, so that's.
I'll say that I am comfortable with the wage grid. I think we, as been mentioned, we are in a competitive environment, and it's really important for the county and the folks that live here to have staff that can actually provide the services that we provide. So I think this is a valuable tool. You talked quite a bit about this impacting folks at the beginning and more from a recruitment standpoint. This is a little bit different than the wage grid discussion, I guess, but from a retention standpoint, what kind of activities are we undertaking to do that, or do we have any future plans to dedicate any resources to more from a retention focus?
Yeah, well, one of the goals that you assigned to the county administrator was to come up with a program for recognizing high-performing employees, and I subsequently assigned that to Audrey.
Pass it off.
But, so we are. So we're looking at different things that we can do. Like I explained, this wage grid has a couple of features that help with retention, not specifically geared towards retention, but there are some enhancements for retention. And then other things that we can work on. We've also, one of my goals from the prior year, which Audrey did, was the onboarding process. So we're doing more with onboarding employees and getting them dedicated to the organization. So there's lots of different things that we are doing, working on that.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Or if not, is there a motion that anyone wants to entertain?
I would make a motion to approve the wage grid adjustments.
Okay, a motion by Supervisor Cowner. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Fiedler. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, item number 5, resolution providing for additional step increases for healthcare campus nursing staff. Audrey.
So this is another one that ties into the new wage grid. So if that is approved and implemented, then we'd request that this also is implemented. We, in the past, already looked at CNA wages and made some adjustments there, but we didn't really focus on LPNs or RN positions. And so as we looked at their new placement on the wage grid, they had some significant upgrading for those couple positions. We were well below market for those jobs. And because of that, like Ken said, those people kind of on the bottom all get grouped together and they end up in step 1. All of our long-term employees, it impacts them as well. They're moving down to like step 2 or step 3, even though they may have been here for 15 to 20 years. So that kind of makes it difficult for new hires as well, knowing that you have somebody with that much experience that's been here and they're going to be coming in at the same kind of pay rates as our long-term employees. So it really is based not just on compression, but more of the market with the nursing shortage and being able to retain the people that we have. I think it's especially important at the healthcare campus to look at that retention factor of the new wage grid. So they put in a request to say, for some of our long-term employees, could we please add a couple step increases so that they are at a market rate where they deserve to be based on the length of service and commitment that they've made to us over the years.
The other thing I'd point out, when we talked about the CNAs, we were doing contract staffing in excess of 400,000 a year. That's down to 200 or 250. A lot of it is here. So again, we need to be able to recruit, bring those employees in, like the LPNs we haven't hired in a year. If we can get staff on board that are employees rather than contract services, we'll actually end up saving money. But we want to make sure that with the new wage grid that does dramatically increase those starting wages, which will make us more competitive and be able to attract those new employees, that we don't chase all the existing employees away. The nice thing about this one is that Medicaid rates went up this past year pretty significantly. So the nursing home has the resources to be able to cover this cost increase. So
It should hopefully more than pay for itself by removing some of those contract services, right? I think we only have 4 full-time LPNs on staff right now, and they all are long-term employees. So we're staffing the rest of our LPNs with contract services, which is, 3-4 times as of expense.
Okay, questions from the committee? Supervisor Fiedler.
Just a very general question. How do I phrase this? There's another group that I'm very active with that's looking into the future of Wisconsin and our workforce development, that sort of thing. And one of the critical positions they've identified are some of the things you've got up there on the screen right now, and that is particularly registered nurses are very important to a community, particularly a smaller community, and having a sufficient number of them to attract businesses and people to move into their communities. And so what they're looking at is very creative things that could be done to attract registered nurses. Obviously, one could try with great wages to hire them away from, let's just say, Minnesota. And we could all think of 4 or 5 creative things very quickly we could do, but I just wondered if we had in any way given consideration to other very creative personnel recruiting things that we could do. For example, scholarships to nursing students with obligations to come to St. Croix County. Or, again, we could talk forever about incentives we might have. But just a quick thought, have we, or do you think that would be beneficial for us to consider that in the future?
yeah, I think it'd be beneficial to consider. I don't know that we have any programs right now for the RNs. I know for like CNAs, we have a nurse educator that will actually do the class and train the CNAs, and whether they stay with us or they go somewhere else, we at least get that relationship established to help draw CNAs to the organization. So yeah, I mean, I would be open to other ideas. RNs are probably a little bit more difficult coming up with something along those same lines. But yeah, and then the wages that we're setting doesn't make us attractive to draw people away from the Twin Cities. It only makes us not several dollars below so that we're completely ignored, that no one even applies because they look at our starting wage and go, well, no one's working for that. So it puts us into the range of competitiveness, but by no means to the point where we're going to be drawing everyone away by paying higher wages. I just want to make sure we clarified that too.
If I could just add one more thing. The Deloitte Touche had done a big study of what it meant to have, let's just say, a registered nurse in your community. And they identified several other very key employees that really made a big difference to the quality of life in a community. And they basically concluded that, and they suggested public-private partnerships, but they concluded that over a course of very few years, that having that registered nurse in this example really, really did pay for itself. And it could, because it did attract people, it did keep people, and there were just all sorts of things. So in that, I'll just call it neutral study by a big consulting accounting firm, they just felt that the benefits were enormous to try to really go out of your way now to put in seed money to get people like that into your community. We're very fortunate that we're not quite like some of the more rural northern Wisconsin counties that are desperate for this. I can't remember what statistic I saw, but it was something on OBGYNs where like 30 of the 72 counties don't have any in Wisconsin. And it's like very difficult for that medical situation. And we don't have that here, but just raising that in case we want to be creative, I'd be all for it.
All right. Any other questions, comments? If not, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Fiedler to adopt the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Counter. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Business item number 6, resolution amending personnel policy, compensation classification. Audrey, busy tonight.
All right, so this one, actually just, I was at a employment law seminar, and they brought this up, that if you don't have this in your policy, you absolutely should. Right, when we classify positions as exempt or non-exempt, we have to follow the FLSA regulations on that. And so if we would take improper deductions from an exempt employee, we could lose the opportunity to even classify employees as exempt anymore. The FLSA can come in and kind of take that right away from you. So we want to put into our policy specifics surrounding at what point can we deduct wages from an exempt employee, under what situation. So we need to have that defined in the policy. So that is really kind of all that was added.
Policy defines current practice.
Okay, any discussion? Nope. Is there a motion? Supervisor Long, is there a second? Second by Supervisor Counter. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 7, consideration of utility easement with Excel Energy. Heather, I think this is you.
Yes, so this request came to the Community Development Department to replace or rebuild a transmission line across Pine Lake. So this is a low voltage transmission line because it's under 100 kilovolts. And so they are just proposing to replace the existing line with new lines, and they want to start this project in January, and it would be completed by around August. And so attached in the packet is the project map, the list of landowners, which is basically St. Croix County, and 2 other individuals, and then the proposed easement language. And also included in that is the compensation that Xcel Energy would provide to the county for this easement. Community Development and the Parks Department have reviewed this, and they believe it is appropriate to proceed with. I did reach out to the individual at Xcel Energy today just to make sure that this was a low voltage project and not a high voltage project, and he did indicate that it was a low voltage project. And so that's why the easement language indicates the low voltage transmission line easement, so that way it would be under 100 kilovolts. And I'm speaking with Supervisor Counter. There may be a request to add that specific language in here, that this would always be under 100 kilovolts, and if they needed something more than that, they would have to come back to the county to seek that approval. And I don't think there's any issues from Xcel Energy's standpoint to add that language, because they understand this is a low voltage transmission line.
Yeah, I think he had said that the PSC regulations and high voltage are different, so it would probably be a completely different easement anyways.
Correct. In the statutes, Wisconsin Statute 1.12 and 196.491 do define what a high voltage transmission line is and what the requirements are. They are much higher than just coming to the county. They would have to go through the PSC to get approval for a high voltage line. So Xcel Energy did indicate in an email to me that since this is 69 kilovolts, it is not high voltage and is not under those guidelines.
Supervisor Fiedler.
I would know the answer to this if I had my bylaws in front of me and saw the jurisdiction of this committee. But you mentioned it had gone through community development. But maybe either the corporate counsel or Ken could just, I know it's a simple question, but why do we also have jurisdiction over it? Is it because we handle easements ultimately?
Easements, yeah. Use of land is the jurisdiction of the administration committee.
Okay.
So it hasn't gone through the community development committee. Jason's fully aware of it, and Parks doesn't have any issues with it. But this is the committee of jurisdiction. I always try to make sure that we only use one committee for things and not have two different committees reviewing the same item.
Great, thanks.
Supervisor Counter?
Just want to give a little background. Why I have the concern is because once, I guess I know they're stating in there that it's a low voltage on the title block up on the top of this easement. Where the concern becomes is because this is a county park underneath it, and because of how the right-of-way is, if you look at the map that's in front of you there, you see this isn't the only line. You see that there's several that run within it, and typically what ends up happening with these is they can from their easement, they're allowed to repair and to enlarge and do anything they once they have the easement, it allows them a lot of additional rights. I realize they're keeping it under the 100 kV. Where the importance to this becomes is there is park space underneath it, and when you start running these larger lines, there is concern by some people of stray voltage and other issues, and then it becomes a liability and a potential liability for the county. So by putting anything in, even just this simple phrase to keep it under the 100 kV, that 100 kV is where the flagging portion from even through the realtors, through the Wisconsin statutes for reporting in their real estate condition report. Anything that goes 100 kV and more is considered a potential detriment to property. So it is a requirement in their reporting. So I'm just asking that we would consider to add that one phrase in there. It's a definite definition then that we're not going to allow an accession to exceed that 100 kV line.
So Supervisor Long, go ahead.
I think you mentioned there were two other adjacent landowners, and I would like to assume that they are aware of this project and they discussed it and they don't have a problem with it, or is there concerns on their behalf?
I have not heard that they've had any concerns. They also received offers, so they would receive funding also for these easements. So the two other property owners are the Carol McKinley Revocable Trust and Ruth Holdcraft. So they would have received the same proposal from Xcel Energy and the same or similar compensation. So I have not heard any objections from either of them, but they would also have to sign off on an easement agreement with Xcel Energy.
Yeah, Supervisor Counter.
The other thing that was in there when I read the easement is that it's non-exclusive, so that also gives them the right for other utilities to be able to use their easement for other things. So it may not be just Xcel Energy, it can be other units or other companies, because Xcel or Northern States Power owns the easement, but they do have the right then to sublet it or to have other people use it.
I don't think they can grant an easement to somebody else. It just means that they're not the only ones that can use these. And it's really for our benefit that it's non-exclusive, because we can grant a parallel or identical easement for an underground utility the same as their overhead utility. That's my understanding of it.
Yes, I believe provision 4, if you want to scroll to 4, it says grantor, which is St. Croix County, covenants with NSP, which is Xcel Energy, that St. Croix County is the owner of the above described property and has the right to sell and convey an easement in the manner and form aforesaid. So that means we have that power, not Xcel Energy. Is that the provision you were referring to?
Was there something in there that said that they had non-exclusive or something where it would give them the right for others to use their easement?
If you look
For
at
their
provision
purpose.
1, yeah, it says St. Croix County grants to NSB a perpetual non-exclusive easement. But I don't see that that gives them the right to allow other people. I think we would have to sign an easement agreement with other people, unless it was a company that NSP was contracting with to install the new transmission lines, that's acceptable. But if it was somebody else that wanted to put a different utility in there, I think we would have to, St. Croix County would have to sign an easement agreement with that utility company.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood, because I know that one of the court cases I was looking at earlier, the original owner of the easement ended up selling it to a transmission company, and the transmission company took over the easement and had use, and they didn't reestablish a new easement.
And I think this specifically says up above under C, the right, privilege, and easement to construct, operate, maintain, use, build, rebuild, or remove the facility. So those are the only things that NSP is allowed to do. So we're not selling the property to them per se, but granting them the right to use it for the transmission line. But I can follow up with Xcel Energy just to ensure that that's the intent of this easement agreement.
And that if they have the right to sell their easement rights to somebody else.
Yes, I can follow up with them.
Yeah. My interpretation of non-exclusive, that's to our benefit. If we granted an exclusive easement to NSP, only they would be able to use that property, and we wouldn't be able to grant a parallel easement to
Yeah.
it, so.
Okay, so from a clarity standpoint here, Supervisor Cowner, you are asking for some language to be changed in here to maintain that it's a low voltage easement. Is that, and that, where would that be in the language that we're looking at?
Or just identify that it's under 100 kV instead of saying the title low voltage.
I think if you, in the first paragraph where it says, this low voltage transmission line easement, quote easement, we could put a comma there, which is not to exceed 100 kilovolts, comma, as set forth below. That would clarify that it's a low voltage transmission line easement. We can put it in that first paragraph. And that's what I would recommend to Xcel Energy to fix. So if you scroll up a little bit further, Ken, oops. So right in that first paragraph right there, I think you can put this, the undersigned hereinafter called grantor hereby grants to Northern States Power Company, a Wisconsin corporation, hereinafter referred to as NSP, this low voltage transmission line easement, comma, which shall not exceed 100 kilovolts, comma, as set forth below. And then it's clear that it won't exceed 100 kilovolts.
I would be supportive of that change just because I think we'd be having a different discussion if it was a high voltage transmission line, so. Or we may not even have, sounds like the PSC maybe have jurisdiction there, but, so I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about that change. It's not, we don't really need to do an amendment, right, because this is another resolution.
It hasn't been motioned yet, so when you motion it, can be a motion with that
Okay.
additional language.
That condition.
Would you like to make a motion, Supervisor Kellner?
I'd make a motion to approve this easement, transmission line easement through the Pine Lake Park area as requested by Xcel Energy or Northern States Power Company, with the condition that the additional language be placed in the first paragraph concerning keeping it under, that it would not exceed the 100 kilovolt line capacity.
Okay. Do we have a second motion by Supervisor Cowner, second by Supervisor Fiedler? Any other discussion? Don't see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thanks, Heather. Okay, that is all of our business items. Request for future agenda items. I know Supervisor Fiedler mentioned a little bit when we were talking about item number 2 about potentially creating a mechanism to make some of these conversations almost like you had suggested, almost a consent agenda piece there. I know there wasn't, you weren't specifically clear on what you would necessarily wanted, but just kind of encouraging staff. I think you all know that I appreciate efficient meetings. So but there's also that balance of having to make sure that we don't fail to have the oversight that we need to do at this committee. So maybe that's something that staff or can think about if there's opportunities there. I would be open to that for a future agenda item if you want to talk about that. Yeah, okay. Any other future agenda items from members? Okay, any announcements or correspondence? Ken?
Yeah, there's going to be a budget amendment on a special community development committee right before the county board. They discussed it at community development, their agenda topic, which was the bids they had received for the loop trail north of Hudson. It's the bike trail from North Hudson going up 35. So those were significantly over budget. So they need about, I think it was 375,000 extra, if I'm remembering correctly. So they're going to propose a budget amendment to that KIP project to authorize the additional funds out of KIP fund balance. I just kind of wanted to let you know because it's a financial transaction, but it's a purely parks related. And so they're the ones that are going to introduce it. And it'll be on the next county board agenda then if it clears their special committee meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. All right, date of our next meeting, January 16th. And other than we are adjourned at 5:51. Thanks, everybody, and happy holidays.